Welcome everyone to the 9th Biennial Winter Wildlands Alliance Grassroots Advocacy Conference. Biennial means every 2 years, as you probably know. So 2 years ago, we generally, all other 8 times that we've done this, we've done it in person, crammed into a lodge somewhere. A couple years ago, we were in downtown Boise, which was new for us to be kind of in an urban setting. But we could see public lands from the windows. And 2 years before that, we were up on Donner Summit at an old Sierra Club lodge, which was great fun. 2 years before that, we were in Golden at the American Alpine Club headquarters. And 2 years from now, we really have our eyes on the Pacific Northwest. So if anybody has a concept of a great place where people can stay and gather and within sight of, if not on public lands, that would be great. 2023. But for now, here we are in a virtual setting, which has its pros and cons. The pros, of course, are that people are able to join us from across the country with no expense. The con, of course, is that we're all exhausted with Zoom, and it's just not as dynamic, and we don't get to look out and see a sea of friendly faces and mingle with folks over the breakfast buffet. But here we are. I'm David Page. I'm the Advocacy Director for Winter Wildlands Alliance. I'm based in Mammoth Lakes, California, which is Paya-Hunadu, the traditional and current homelands of Paiute and Shoshone peoples. Our main offices, we're a small but feisty team, but our main offices are in Boise, Idaho, which is Shoshone and Bannock territory. And then my policy colleague, Hillary Eisen, is based in Bozeman, Montana. And I can't begin to do a land acknowledgement for that place because so many different people have come and gone through that region and continue to. We are an alliance of 32 different grassroots groups across the country. We're a national nonprofit. We work to educate, inspire, and empower people to take care of their public lands and wild winter landscapes. And we run a snow school program, which has about 70 sites nationwide and gets upwards of 34,000 kids out on snow every winter. Last winter was a little unique. We created a bunch of virtual content for homeschooling, which was great. And we're hoping to be able to get some more kids out in this new setting this winter. Backcountry Film Festival is another of our programs. In a normal year, we have about 100+ screenings in towns and cities across the country and really across the world. Last year, that also went virtual. That's an important fundraiser for our grassroots groups and some of our snow school sites. So watch for, and it's always a great gathering place for backcountry enthusiasts and local communities. This year, I think it'll be a little hybrid. Some groups will be able to do an outdoor screening. Some folks will have to revert to the hybrid model and share the link online, but it's always terrific programming and great to share the stoke. And so look for that in our channels. And all of our work is really depends on our membership. So if you're a member, thank you very much. And if you're not, please do join us. You can go to winterwildlandsalliance.org for information on that. And we have a brand new terrific membership director, Kate Thorpe, who would love to interact with you. So that's us. The theme of this conference, a little housekeeping, is can we save the backcountry from ourselves? We've had some really terrific discussions. This is panel 5 out of 6. We opened up with some discussion about messaging and etiquette, and how do we inspire a sense of personal responsibility out on the landscape. We've talked about winter travel planning. We've talked about snow rangers and trail hosts and different sort of partnership, stewardship programs with the Forest Service. We've talked this morning, we had a great discussion about Forest Service funding. What are the different avenues for that? What are the possibilities and challenges? Again, all these panels are being recorded or have been recorded and will be put on our website for sharing with your colleagues, or if you missed one, feel free to tune in. They work as great sort of podcast content. If you're going for a quick hour run, you can listen to one of these panels. This afternoon, after this, an hour after we wrap up here, we'll have one more discussion with some great social media influencers. Usually that's our most popular panel, talking about, how can we inspire responsible recreation, responsible use, and inclusive, equitable access through social media. So please do tune in for that. Before we get started, though, I want to do a bit of just a quick land acknowledgement statement. We're talking about public lands here, and when we talk about public lands, we have to, I think, acknowledge and remember that the history of these places is long and often, maybe in an overriding way, kind of tragic. People have been living in these landscapes for thousands of years, in some cases tens of thousands of years, depending on where the glaciers were. But people have been living here, traveling here, depending on these landscapes for a long time. And, over the last couple hundred years, a lot of people have been forcibly removed. Have been, we all know the history of massacres and forced marches, and that needs to be remembered. And I think not just to dwell on it. And I don't think we're going to return to some mythical former state, but here we are. We're in a democracy. We have a growing population, and I think based on the history, it's incumbent on us as citizens of a democracy to participate in how we manage these landscapes. So that's both on an individual level and also from an advocacy standpoint. Whether that's engaging with our land management agencies or engaging with Congress that helps to fund this management. So I think that's worth saying. So I've repeated it a few times, but there's a version for this morning. So to jump in, because we've got a lot to cover here, this one's exciting. This is kind of a new priority for us, dealing with, there's been kind of a spate of ski area expansion proposals over the last few years, and we're tracking upwards of, 20 plus different proposals. Forest Service manages, according to some numbers on the USDA website, 122 different ski areas, 27 million annual visits to ski areas on national forests. Geraldine may be able to update those numbers. But in any case, it's obviously an important source of revenue for the Forest Service. All of us are skiers, or a lot of us are skiers or riders, and learned how to do it and got passionate about it through ski areas. The question remains, do we need to expand those ski areas? And if so, how can we do it to minimize impacts to communities and to wildlife and to surrounding ecosystems? So that's the topic of conversation today. Without further ado, I want to just do a quick lightning round where each of our panelists will introduce his or herself, and then we'll jump into kind of a structured discussion for about 35 minutes. And then we really want to open it up for questions from attendees. So as you're listening, if questions occur to you, please do drop those in the chat or the Q&A. And also I've forgotten, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself as an attendee in the chat while we're talking, and if you could, as just a sort of an icebreaker, if you wouldn't mind putting in what your go-to ski resort is, that would also be nice. And that'll be saved, and that allows us afterwards to sort of figure out who is here. But in any case, drop your questions in the chat or the Q&A. Melinda Quick, our events director, is in the background behind that Winter Wildlands Alliance logo, and she will be collecting the questions, and then she'll pop on around quarter till, and she can moderate a question and answer session and feed some questions to the panelists. So hopefully I've covered everything. Thanks for your patience, and let's jump in. I'll go ahead and start with you, Don. If you could just introduce yourself and tell us who you are and where you're coming from.
Thanks, David. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. Don Dressler. I'm the Mountain Resort Program Manager for the Rocky Mountain region, which is most of Wyoming and all of Colorado. That I address ski areas. And in our region, we have 27 ski areas. Goes everywhere from Cody, Wyoming on the Montana-Colorado border all the way down to Durango, Colorado. I have the privilege of supporting our snow rangers that are on these national forest units, 17 of them around our region. And we have one of the largest, or we have the largest ski program in the Forest Service. So look forward to talking to you all about that a little bit more.
Great, thanks, Don. Over to you, Carl.
Great. Thanks for having me. My name's Carl Fisher. I'm the executive director of Save Our Canyons. We're a nonprofit organization dedicated to protecting the wildness and beauty of the Wasatch Mountains. I'm here at the base of the Wasatch Mountains, right at the base of Big Cottonwood, right between Little Cottonwood and Big Cottonwood Canyon, which are kind of Utah's skiing mecca, really. So we've been working on ski area. We started as an organization in 1972 in response to Snowbird ski area opening. So both of us will be celebrating our 50th anniversaries coming up here next year. So, and at one point in time, I worked at Snowbird while I was a volunteer and an intern for Save Our Canyons, and then became the director.
Great. Thanks, Carl. Great to have you. Shawn, we'll go to you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Shawn Hill, and I'm the executive director of a nonprofit in Teton Valley, Idaho / Wyoming. We call ourselves VARD, Valley Advocates for Responsible Development, and we mainly advocate for smart land use planning. But we've mostly done that through private lands advocacy, but we have now been presented with a huge public lands issue with the expansion of Grand Targhee Resort. And so we are right now, our organization is trying to educate the community on how to engage in this proposed expansion, and to influence the outcome of the pending environmental impact statement to address socioeconomic issues, because that is what we have found is is what people are the most afraid of with this pending expansion. And then I also convened a group of city planners who work in ski towns in the Western US and Canada. And I think what's happening in Teton Valley, the same story can be repeated in virtually every other ski town. We're all experiencing the same things, the same old headaches, and then the new headaches that have come with the pandemic. So I'm excited to be here today.
Great to have you, Shawn. Thank you. Geraldine.
Hi there, I'm Geraldine Link, and I direct public policy for the National Ski Areas Association. And we're based in Lakewood, Colorado. We have about 320 resort members, 122 of them on public land. On a day-to-day basis, I am the liaison with the US Forest Service for the ski industry. I also do advocacy on federal regulatory policy, and that includes public lands, natural resources, climate change, and explosives. That's one of my specialty areas. And I've been at NSAA for 24 years in this same desk right here. So I feel like I can tell those stories of, back then, this is what it used to be like. So I just want to say thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this, because it's not very often that I get to be, part of a dialogue like this. I think it's really important for all of us to come to the table together and just talk to each other. And so thank you. And I love the outdoors. I'm a skier, I'm a mountain biker, I'm a hiker. I'm going to raft the Grand Canyon in about 10 days, and I'm super excited about it. And anyway, thank you again for hosting this and inviting the ski industry.
Absolutely. Thanks for being here, Geraldine. So Don, I want to start with you, just jumping right in. If you could talk sort of from a Forest Service standpoint, what is the process if a ski area wants to expand? How does that work? Can you walk us through that? Is there a framework? Is there a policy? Is there guidance for you as you consider these proposals?
Absolutely. And, by no means will this be a comprehensive tutorial on special use permitting or NEPA, but I'll try to tease out kind of the main process and some of the considerations, and we can go from there. Right off the top, I think it's important to distinguish what we consider to be internal expansions within an existing permit boundary, and then modifications or expansions of those permit boundaries. So there's really kind of two categories the way that we view them. Most of them will be internal to that permit boundary. So if you can imagine, the permit boundary is kind of the big bubble of some invisible lines, and then the operating boundary is kind of what you see on the ground, which is the rope boundaries that you kind of typically associate. So oftentimes those boundaries will be larger on the permit than they are operationally. So that's just a distinction off the top. You know, all of these ski areas that are operating on national forest will be doing so under a special use permit. And one of the requirements of that permit is to maintain a master development plan. And the master development plan is this, it's a conceptual tool. It's a long range development framework where we kind of look to what is the long-term vision of development within the resort. It establishes some capacity considerations and then some balance of facilities to serve those capacity needs and those guests. These are accepted tools. They're not an approval. They don't carry that weight of go out and build things, but it's a starting point. And I think it's important to start from that planning phase, because that leads you into individual proposals. And that's really kind of where most folks get engaged. Of course, we encourage, and we have some good examples of collaborative, public involved master planning, where, people can understand the vision of the resort, what their goals and objectives are. And so that when individual projects are proposed, they can understand them in that context. But once the Forest Service receives a proposal for some activity, it could be as simple as, replacing snowmaking lines, or it could be expanding those same snowmaking systems. It could be new chairlifts, or it could be replacements of existing chairlifts. And then in this context, it could be developing new terrain for downhill skiing and all of the facilities and services that come with that. So once we receive a proposal, the first question we're going to ask is these screening criteria questions, where is this consistent with the master plan that we've kind of agreed to in this long-term vision document? And then, is it consistent with the forest plan? I know that forest planning was addressed at least a little bit yesterday in one of the sessions. And so these are kind of large 15 to 20 year documents that look at land management prescriptions, or how we kind of carve up the management of that forest. And ski areas are going to be the highly developed intensive use where we have lots of people, but then in those plans you also have the spectrum of development all the way over to wilderness areas where they're undeveloped and more primitive. So after we screen these proposals, we'll start working on the true NEPA aspect of this, which is National Environmental Policy Act. And there are regulations that we follow as to how that goes. One of the first things we do is to determine the appropriate level of analysis, so that we have everything from categorical exclusions, which are kind of predetermined categories of actions that don't require significant analysis, and then all the way over to environmental analysis and then environmental impact statements. So a lot of times with these ski area expansions, we're probably looking at environmental analysis, or EAs, and environmental impact statements, or EISs. Once the proposed action has been developed, we'll do some form of scoping. And that's kind of the first opportunity for folks to understand what that action is. There's a comment period that's mandated through that regulation. And then we'll go through, after that comment period, we'll be working with our specialists and our authorized officers, who are the decision makers, right? So this is with ski areas, this is the forest supervisor of that unit. These are local decisions, and so they're going to take into those local considerations as well. After we get through scoping, we do our analysis. You get to a decision, and then now we follow what is called an objection period. Though, if folks do not, if they have issue with the decision or elements of the decision, there is an objection process where we'll look to see how we can resolve those. So that's really the quick and dirty of how we go through this process. There are multiple opportunities for engagement, and I think the most successful projects are the ones that are really trying to engage those key stakeholders. And as many of the folks that are watching right now are in those groups, those key stakeholder groups. And so it's not just a one-time, one bite at the apple. This is kind of an ongoing relationship that I think we're trying to nurture.
Great. Thank you, Don. That's a super helpful overview. I'm going to turn it over to Geraldine to talk about this from the ski area perspective, from sort of the industry perspective. What are what are the pressures that drive ski areas to want to expand? What's if you can just give us a little sense of from your vantage, what's the need here?
Sure. And I would start by, again, distinguishing between an expansion, which in my view is something outside the existing permit boundary, and an improvement, upgrading type of thing with capital investments. So expansions are actually pretty rare. And I was just quickly trying to do a count of ones that I was aware of in preparation for this panel. And I definitely had less than 10 on my list. So it might be a matter of semantics, how we use that term in terms of, ski areas making improvements or making an expansion, but they're rare. And I would say that the driving forces are very unique to the circumstance. So there are a host of different reasons why a ski area might expand, and it's really going to differ site by site. So for some resorts, it could be crowding, addressing circulation on a mountain. That might be one of the issues driving it. And if I could just touch on some recent figures from NSAA's data, because that's one of the things that we do as an association, is we do research and we release data. This past season was pretty fascinating. We had 59 million skier visits, which is the 5th highest number of all time. And yes, people had more time on their hands, they had more flexibility, but it really speaks to, I think, the popularity and the strength of skiing and recreating in the outdoors. And people flock to the outdoors, especially this past year, to for enjoyment and getting outside. And obviously COVID had a lot to do with that, not just from a distancing perspective, but also there's just a lot more flexibility now in the workforce. So anyway, just a couple numbers there. 59 ski areas had their best visitation record ever this past season. Also, the state of Utah did as well. And 3/4 of all ski areas turned away guests at some point in the season due to capacity or lack of capacity. So it just gives you a sense of where ski areas are. And I think, this is just a great conversation to be having in terms of how do we all get to do our kind of recreation in the outdoors on public lands. And just some other thoughts there on why ski areas expand. Sometimes it's just the terrain mix is not adequate, or it's inappropriate. There might be too much beginner terrain, too much expert terrain. So trying to maximize customer experience and the guest experience sometimes dictates different kinds of terrain being utilized. There can also be transportation or access challenges with resorts. And so opening up new portals or ways to access a resort might be a reason for expansion as well. And so I just try to cover a lot of different ground there, but I would say the reasons are highly unique to the situation.
Great, that's super helpful and fascinating that the appetite is clearly there. Increasing use is something that we're dealing with across the board. And it's interesting that, you know, it wasn't a few years ago, we were sort of talking about the demographic aging out and people not continuing to ski. And now it seems like tables have turned a little bit. Carl, I want to turn it to you to speak, you know, specifically from the vantage of the Wasatch, where, you know, you guys, I think, provide an interesting microcosm for the Western US broadly, and certainly for winter recreation. You know, limited amount of terrain, a lot of different kinds of users. Just talk to us about your experience with working with ski areas and the challenges and the threats to the backcountry that you guys have seen locally.
Right. Well, thanks again. And yeah, I mean, the Wasatch is a very intensely used area, particularly in the wintertime, and it comes with a lot of challenges. I think from our perspective, resort expansions aren't about if, but when. You know, the impacts of both having resorts and the inevitability of their expansions, it seems, which is in part, I think, because there's not a leveled playing field with the U.S. Forest Service and the NEPA process, and some of the policies on Congress, I think, scale has been tipped in favor of resorts rather than in favor of communities. You know, the expansion threats on our lands are real. And I just wanted to share, one of our founders, Alexis Kellner, wrote this book, History of Skiing in Utah. And he has this really great, it's a Dick Bass quote, you know, when Dick Bass opened up Snowbird. And it was in Skiing Magazine, if you guys remember Skiing Magazine. So quotation from Chairman Bass, ultimately, we'll have it all. There are 24 square miles of skiing here, not counting Alta, Brighton, or Park City. It's all right here. It's the existing areas like Snowbird that have expansion terrain and that are being operated properly that are going to be the main source of new and available skiing. So, I mean, from the inception of these resorts, it was, you know, they had their eyes on what was next and what the next move was. And I think our organization really believes at our core that our recreational pursuits cannot continue to deprive the land and its ecosystems from the natural and wild characteristics, particularly given the realities that we're facing with climate change. You know, we've seen, you know, lifts go into adjacent areas. We've seen avalanche control areas be expanded to encompass very popular backcountry access points, which has taken away dispersed recreational access. We're seeing parking on public lands go away and become a real complicating factor, and it's going in the direction of deference to ski areas rather than the dispersed recreationist. You know, we're facing an enormous EIS process right now in Little Cottonwood Canyon, where the entire canyon may well be converted to a gondola corridor. It's a place that has mountain biking, rock climbing, backcountry skiing, tons of multiple use activities, and it's on the verge of being converted to a gondola or a widened roadway. So as skiing continues to grow, it seems like the scales are tipping, I guess, maybe in favor of kind of the popularity of skiing rather than management of these resources, which are national forests. There's wildlife habitat, there are watersheds for, you know, hundreds of thousands of people in the Salt Lake Valley. And it's really, you know, some of the things we're seeing, you know, with this displacement of users, displacement of wildlife, displacement of the ways that we're utilizing our national forests. For example, if a ski lift is built to a ridge line, people are going to start accessing those areas much earlier to try and beat the resort skiing traffic. And the twilight hours of the morning are some of the most important and critical hours for wildlife. So we're increasing disturbances in wildlife habitat, all the while shrinking the integrity of wildlife habitat and fragmenting wildlife connectivity. So I think the impacts that we're seeing on our public lands that come from resort expansions, and I think they come in a variety of ways. And they aren't all just contained to adjacent to the resort. There's also effects on our communities. Where are their employees going to be living? How are they going to be accessing their jobs? People get displaced further and further and further away because the areas near the resorts just aren't affordable to resort workers. And we're seeing the implications of that. Yeah, and I think the NEPA process really, and I hope we can talk about the NEPA process a little bit later, but I don't think the NEPA process is being leveraged in a sophisticated enough a way to really comprehend the far-reaching implications that these ski resorts are having, not only on our forests and on wildlife habitat, but also for our local communities that call these places home. So we would really like to find some opportunities to improve, the resort planning process and the NEPA processes. And there has been, in our estimation, really kind of an expansion in the use of categorical exclusions. And there are a lot of projects that have ripple effects far outside the ski area boundaries that we need to do a better job of understanding, so we can either mitigate, avoid, or what have you.
Thanks, Carl. I really appreciate you laying it out so succinctly. Lots of issues. Speaking of ripple effects, and Shawn, you mentioned the socioeconomic studies that you guys have done. Maybe you can speak to us about that. You referenced Teton Valley as sort of a harbinger or emblematic of what's happening in ski towns across the West. Can you speak to how that relates to this discussion?
Yeah, so we wanted to be able to go to the Forest Service in the run-up to their scoping comment with us. We wanted to cast as wide a net as possible when it came to evaluating socioeconomic impacts. And so we researched what socioeconomic impacts had been studied in 26 other ski area expansions or ski area upgrades that have been completed in the last 5 years. And we found that across the board, things like impacts to recreation, impacts to aesthetics, traffic, and impacts to cultural and historic issues, found that those issues were pretty much studied almost in every expansion or upgrade. What wasn't studied as much was environmental justice impacts, housing impacts, and impacts to quality of life. And that is really what my community and my peer communities, that's what we're the most concerned about. I think people have, for at least a generation or so, have self-selected to live in communities like Teton Valley because it offers a laid-back, amenity-rich lifestyle, and people in the course of pursuing that lifestyle, people sort of gave up their creature comforts. And they gave up the well-paying jobs in the cities. They gave up access to urban services and maybe cultural and historic resources. But more and more, we're finding that as well-heeled people move into these communities, they're bringing those things with them. And then we all know about the remote working phenomenon and how that has just accelerated the transformation of these ski towns into these wealthy enclaves. And what we're seeing here, and I think what most mountain towns are are experiencing is that this infusion of outside capital is driving up housing costs to the point where nobody who actually makes their money, derives their income in the community, can afford to buy a home or even rent a home in the community. And the concern that we have with the ski resort expansion in our backyard, and I think this is true of most mountain towns, is that the ski industry is the nucleus of a larger service industry, hospitality, tourism, and whatever comes along with skier visits and supporting the ski industry. And those kinds of jobs are low paying, and the tourism model and the ski industry model really is hiring as many employees as you can and paying them as little as you can, just because that's the nature of service work. And I think in a community like ours, we need another tourism job like a hole in the head. There's no housing, and the economy is becoming a barbell economy where we have the very rich and the very poor. And I think the other issue that folks are concerned about from a socioeconomic impact is, and this is especially ramped up during COVID, is over tourism and pushing our public lands to the limit. And our community is near Grand Teton and Yellowstone National Parks. And you talk to no local will go to Yellowstone between Memorial Day and Labor Day, just because it's so crowded and it's so unpleasant. And I fear that the skiing experience is becoming like that. When I ski in Utah over the holidays with my family, I just like, if compared to Grand Targhee and what I'm used to, it's not pleasant. It's crowded. It's, people are irritated because of the crowds. And it just really raises the question of yes, there is a demand for skiing, and there's a demand to live in ski towns, but is it up to our communities to meet this seemingly insatiable demand? Or do we need to talk about like capacity? And can we actually accommodate all of this demand? And I've heard it likened to, not everyone can go to the Super Bowl. But that's, it's a great experience, and more people would like to, there's more demand to go to the Super Bowl than the Super Bowl can accommodate. But we accept that when it comes to things like, culture or sports or other activities. And so when we're talking about recreational activities, is it a given that we just have to keep meeting this incessant demand? Or at some point, do we have to say, no mas, our communities can't take it, our public lands can't take it, the user experience can't take it? And I think that's what we're really wrestling with here in Teton Valley, is that the quality of life and the ability for people who aren't independently wealthy and to be part of this really dense community fabric. Those are things that have defined this community for years. And the fear is that with Grand Targhee's expansion, it's the beginning of the end. And the lifestyle that we have come to know it will evaporate. And so what we're hoping is that with our socioeconomic scoping letter, that the EIS for Grand Targhee will really delve into these things and really take socioeconomic issues and really put them at center stage in determining whether or not the expansion of the ski resort into public lands is appropriate.
Shawn, thank you very much. I'm going to want to pivot here in about a minute to a discussion about solutions, how we can make the process better, what are the points of engagement. Geraldine, I just want to give you a chance to weigh in on what you just heard. I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm sure none of these issues are news to you. I just in the spirit of collaboration and positive working relationships, are there things that the ski area industry is considering and taking seriously in terms of these impacts that have been referenced?
Yeah, I would say, and there were so many things said, it's kind of hard to choose which ones to follow up on. But I think that ski areas are, they're part of a mountain community. And I feel like, for example, the affordable housing crisis absolutely exists. And it was a crisis before COVID. It's gotten even worse with COVID. But ski areas view that's a community-wide issue. It's not just a ski area issue. So, if you add a chairlift or not, or a new portal for a ski area, whether or not you do that is not going to solve the affordable housing crisis in mountain communities, because there are so many forces at play there that have caused that. I think also ski areas are feeling the effects of so many people flocking to the outdoors for outdoor recreation. And in Little Cottonwood Canyon, for example, we've got Alta Ski Area turning away hundreds of season pass holders, like literally people who have purchased season passes. They drive up the canyon, they're turned away because parking spots are being taken by backcountry users. And these are parking lots that are constructed, maintained, plowed by the ski area. So we absolutely have issues that we have to deal with. And from our perspective, some of that is supporting the Forest Service recreation program, because the Forest Service's recreation staffing and resources have been gutted. And that's just, what we have witnessed. We have absolutely been in there supporting a larger recreation budget for the Forest Service, because we see the needs, visitor services, trailhead services, all of those things need attention, they need funding, and they need resources. So I think, those are things that we have in common in terms Absolutely. Of, the issues that we're talking about. So I don't want to jump too far ahead into the solutions part, but there are some things that we've been working on the affordable housing front and workforce housing. I just want to quickly note that we worked in support of Senator Bennett's bill in 2018. His Flexible Partnerships Act was a bill that allowed Forest Service administrative sites to be used, and it's by the private sector or by a county or local government, but to use those sites for uses that would include workforce housing. And so I'm making this very simplistic in describing it, but it's a great program. That bill was included in the Farm Bill in 2018. That's an existing program right now. And I think that we need to throw more support behind using that program to allow public lands that are already being used for administrative sites that are no longer needed by the Forest Service to use those for workforce housing. And just by way of example, that bill, it was only a 5-year program. So it's going to expire in 2023. And so maybe we can work together to have that authorization re-upped in Congress. I think that would be really helpful.
Okay, thanks for that, Geraldine. Yeah, funding, certainly something we can all agree on. Developing public lands further is where it starts to get contentious, right? Dawn, I want to throw it over to you. Let's start to talk a little bit about some innovative solutions, things that you're thinking about from an agency standpoint in terms of improving the process. What are points of engagement for our grassroots folks, for stakeholders to better engage in the process? And as Carl said, where sometimes it feels, weighted unfairly toward industry, are there ways for us to even the scales a little bit so that individual stakeholders feel their voice is being heard too, and communities?
This is a great discussion, and we could go on for hours, right?
Sure.
Just, I think like I mentioned earlier, one of our challenges is also kind of one of our strengths, which is, you know, being a decentralized agency where decisions are made at a local level. And the beauty of that is, you know, taking in some of those local considerations into account. You know, where we as an agency, or myself in particular, have tried to bring some innovation and experience, is trying to use some shared examples to help, you know, forests look a little bit outside of maybe their boundaries or their situations. So one of those things is bringing some consistency to the NEPA planning process. You know, we've stood up a mountain resort team here in the Rocky Mountain region that is now assisting other regions around the country to bring some specialized experience to ski area planning, to kind of streamline, if you will, these planning processes that in the past have taken years and years, and trying to make these a little bit more efficient. But, you know, I guess another point that I'd like to make to this question is the role that cooperators and stakeholders play, right? And I think we have some good experience around the country that I'm familiar with cooperator status, which, you know, in Shawn's case is, you know, Teton County, Idaho, Teton County, Wyoming, being cooperators through an analysis process. We're looking at other areas that how do we bring tribal governments into the cooperator status for lands that are important to them. And I think, you know, really it's going to be through this collective decision-making process that we're going to make better decisions. We could retitle this entire conference as to, you know, the challenges of being a multi-use organization, of, you know, trying to do everything from recreation to grazing and mining, timber and everything in between. And so, you know, that it's why I have a job that I love, but it's also one of the things that challenges and motivates me as well. So I'm actually looking forward to hearing some ideas and opportunities from everyone else too.
Great, thanks, Don. And I want to bring Melinda on and tee up the Q&A from attendees, but I want to give Carl and Shawn each, you know, 30 seconds, 60 seconds to speak to these solutions and possible new ways of moving forward in terms of process and community engagement. Go ahead, Carl.
Cool, thanks. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that we hear in pretty much every process we engage with the forest is that your idea is out of scope. And I think the root of that problem is that the community is not included in meaningfully, and other user groups and other people, you know, water departments and things like that aren't included meaningfully in setting the purpose and need of the projects that are confronting our forest. Because everybody knows that purpose and need, everything goes back to purpose and need. And if these connected actions and these issues that we're experiencing aren't foundationally part of the purpose and need, we've already lost. And the rest of the process is just a painful ride that you can't get off of in the NEPA process sometimes. So I think the other things that we need to do is require resorts when they're looking at expanding or have development proposals. They should be required to meet with community groups, with cities and counties to formulate their plans and get ideas and feedback before the NEPA process starts. And I think, honestly, anywhere that has, you know, mountain resorts or ski areas needs to have legislation that protects backcountry areas, wildlife habitat, and other important values that our public lands have, because the forest plans are just not strong enough to defend against it. We're fortunate here in the Wasatch that, you know, it says no ski area expansion, but our fear is that that's a Forest Service supervisor's amendment away from being gone.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Carl. Shawn, 30, 60 seconds.
Yeah. When we did this study on socioeconomic issues that were studied in other NEPA processes, what our ultimate goal, I mean, we definitely wanted to inform the Grand Turkey expansion project, but we also we're hoping that we could give the Forest Service just a template and to study ski area expansions or the socioeconomic impacts from ski area expansions holistically and methodically. And we wouldn't have to make anything out of cloth. And I think, you know, this, if we could convince the Forest Service to do that, or our public land agencies to take, you know, a methodical, holistic approach, then I think a lot of these ethereal issues like quality of life and then very practical, hard issues like affordable housing can be better addressed. And I also think it seems to me that the enabling legislation for ski resort expansions seem to really be a product of another time from the 80s and the 90s and the early 2000s. And the communities that were around ski resorts during those times, they're much different now. Then it was about economic development and bringing economic development to rural areas. And I think now these areas are these wealthy enclaves. We don't need economic development. And so, you know, maybe, you know, administrative procedures may not be enough to get us there. Maybe there needs to be change in legislation.
Okay, thanks, Shawn. Melinda, over to you. If you got some questions coming in from the audience.
Yeah, we've got quite a few. Some of them do touch on similar topics. So I'm going to start out with a long one that a couple of people have asked kind of similar questions to, that is regarding capacity to preserve and protect the lands versus making sure there's access for everyone to get out there and do what they want to do, whether it's a ski area or public lands. Elizabeth brought up, you know, we can give everyone a chance to access, just not every day, based on how a lot of ski areas reacted to COVID and started putting in reservations and advanced booking, you know, so that everyone, you know, can either go up on a Monday or a Wednesday or a Friday and they have access then, or you get Tuesdays and Wednesdays, was her idea. And Matt and Howie both suggested similarly that maybe we start looking at increasing and bettering the backcountry options instead of expanding lifts and ski areas to encourage people to get outside without as much governance and mitigation there. So I think everyone's kind of wondering if that expansion of the backcountry is a response to ski area expansion, or if that's a good solution. Kind of wanting to get the panelists' views on that.
Big, broad question. Anybody want to take it? Carl, Don?
Sure. I mean, these areas that, you know, these mountainous environments that, you know, ski areas exist in, absolutely have a carrying capacity. They have a carrying capacity, a social capacity. They have an ecological capacity. They have an experiential capacity, right? And so I think we're actually working with a coalition of local governments to try and better understand that here in the Wasatch Mountains and identify what the carrying capacity is, what some of the choices are. If you go to, you know, I expect it to come back with a series of thresholds, right? If you go to this level, you can expect this, but the roads, the parking lots, the lifts, everything has a capacity, but so too do the ecosystem services that a lot of us are reliant upon in these areas. And so those do need to be considered. And I think Shawn, actually, his analogy with the Super Bowl is spot on. For some reason, you know, these sensitive environments are just like, let's see how many people we can cram in the phone booth. Rather than what are our management objectives and how does this visitation detract from that?
Nice, thanks. Don, looked like you had something to say, and Geraldine, I want you to weigh in on this too, if you can.
Yeah, I'll try to be brief. You know, this is a complicated relationship between, you know, the Forest Service is kind of the land management agency, or the landlord, if you will, and our permittees, you know, the ski areas that are operating businesses. And, you know, we have a complex relationship to how business decisions are made and what those effects may be on the public. You know, I think COVID is kind of the perfect storm of, you know, how this really kind of came to play, where not only did we have the capacity considerations that we would have any other season, but now we were looking to our public health departments, which were further reducing some of those capacities, especially with indoor facilities. So that unquestionably drove some people to look for alternative experiences. And where are those alternative experiences? They're still on the national forest. They're just outside of ski area boundaries. And so, prior panels have discussed that increased use pressure. So whether, we're just displacing one use for another, but it's still use, it's still pressure on the national forest system and land managers and how to balance that use. So we're trying to take lessons learned. We're trying to apply some of those, the partnerships and the stakeholder groups and everything else, the volunteer organizations, to really make this a better situation. And we welcome, it is an open door for folks that want to come help.
Thanks for that, Don. Geraldine?
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that if you total up all public land ski areas across the nation, they occupy less than 1/10 of 1% of National Forest System lands. And so we are accommodating a lot of recreationists on a very small footprint, if you look at it from that perspective. I think that a lot of times the reason people come to recreate near a ski area is because of the amenities that are there, because of the improvements that are there, because of the investments that are made by the ski area operator in those areas. So these are just, big questions. Another one I like to think about is, whose recreation is more valuable? And is it a backcountry skier, or is it a family from Atlanta who has never, ever experienced a national forest before? And they want beginner terrain at a ski area. So they're complicated issues. I wanted to just make a quick plug for legislation that we are working on called the SHRED Act. And I didn't come up with that acronym, by the way, but this is a federal legislation. It's a bill in Congress that would retain a portion of the fees that ski areas pay to the Forest Service or to the US government for use of lands. And those funds would go towards a lot of the issues that we've talked about today. One of them is the mountain resort teams that Don talked about for the Forest Service, so that you can have specialized expertise on a forest in approaching ski area and other developed recreation projects. Some of the money goes towards avalanche forecasting and education, because that is grossly underfunded, not just for the Forest Service, but that money can be shared with nonprofit partners as well. The legislation also addresses the Administrative Sites Leasing Act implementation. So it allows funds to be used by the Forest Service to implement this new authority that it has to allow other uses on administrative sites, such as employee housing or workforce housing. And it also funds trailhead services like parking and trash and plowing and toilets and all of those other things as well. So I know we're running out of time, so I just want to throw that in as a solution that we are supporting and working on. And I hope that others will do the same.
Appreciate that, Geraldine. And yeah, we are running out of time. This always ends up being frustrating, but we'll probably allow it to go over a couple of minutes. And then, as Melinda said in the chat, we will try to follow up and make connections so that those questions get answered after the fact. Melinda, time for a couple more probably?
Yeah, definitely. We have two again that are pretty similar. One from Nicole here, and I think we spoke about it a little bit beforehand. At least I know Carl did, about what we can do maybe before that ski area expansion proposal or the actual NEPA CEQA process goes forward. But Nicole asks, how do we strengthen CEQA/NEPA reviews to adequately address community and environmental impacts of ski area expansion? I can ask, another way to think of it is, how do we expand the scope and the ability of these processes to make these decisions more holistic?
Well, I think that's what we try to do in our research. We try, at least with socioeconomic impacts, is we really try to cast a wide net with the hope that other communities could look at what we did and also cast a wide net. And I think, I don't want to, that's not the solution, but I hope it gets us closer to one.
Carl?
And I would just say, I guess, using kind of the Little Cottonwood Canyon environmental impact statement here in Little Cottonwood Canyon, they're only looking at 4 months of an entire year, yet they're putting infrastructure in that's going to be there year round. They're only looking at the 30th busiest day as it pertains to ski area visits, not the 30th busiest day as it pertains to access in this canyon that has rock climbing, backcountry skiing, hiking, backpacking, fishing, all of these other values. We've ignored all of that stuff. And, the NEPA process and the scoping process has allowed for that to happen. And so we need to be able to incorporate the issues and actually solve not just the problem that a ski resort is maybe facing, but the problem that the region is facing, and in the context of some of the problems the ski areas are facing, which isn't to say we don't want to solve the problems that the ski areas are facing, because I believe as we opened up, they're part of the fabric of our community. It just feels like they're beginning to dominate our alpine landscapes with lofty plans for expansion all across the Wasatch Range.
Thanks, Carl. Melinda, I don't know, that's a pretty great place to end. I'm sure there are 10 more questions. Is there one that is there another one, or should we go ahead and wrap it up?
I think the remaining questions would get us even deeper into the subject. Yeah. So what we will do is I've copied the questions and I've noted the attendees that asked them, and we'll try our best to follow up with emails and get you guys answers. So we appreciate your understanding, but like David said, we want to be cognizant of everybody's time, and this was really great. Thank you all.
Yep. And again, this is an issue that we're working on and we'll continue to work on. So certainly follow our channels and, tune in to all of the organizations represented here. This is something that's going to be an issue for us in the coming years. So thank you very much to all our attendees for joining us. Thanks for sharing your experience and expertise. We'll connect you with attendees as they reach out to us. And thank you to all the attendees for joining us as well. It's been a really terrific discussion. Please do join us again in 49 or whatever, in 58 minutes to talk to some athlete influencers and talk about social media and responsible recreation. Thanks again for being part of the conference, and we'll see you all in an hour.
Bye, thanks.